process of adapting one piece of media into another format is likely arduous and time-consuming. Trying to translate ideas that work on the written page into visual medium like film means having to sacrifice colorful prose and interpretive sentences for very literal imagery. That also applies to adapting video games to the screen. Removing the interactive elements puts more of a focus on the narrative structure, which is often quite lacking in games as it doesn't quite matter as much for building an engaging gameplay hook. How do you convey the sensation of pushing a button and making something happen when agency is not a property offered by film? Ideas like that were floating around in my head as I watched Amazon's Like a Dragon Yakuza series. As a big fan of Sega's Yakuza/Like a Dragon, I had hoped the success of Sonic the Hedgehog's movies would have given the showrunner some clear ideas for what they should keep from the games and what they should change to create an engaging story. Instead, we've gotten a series that not only makes arbitrary changes to its plotline and characters, but one that fails at capturing the essence of its namesake franchise. If you had never heard of Like a Dragon before and were only exposed via this TV show, you'd probably assume fans of the games were idiots. Before I proceed with this video, I would like to make one thing clear. I am not against adaptations of franchises making dramatic changes to fit new mediums. Obviously, a game series such as Yakuza/Like a Dragon tells a specific story because it works as a way to motivate players for their next objective. Films often have detailed backstories for characters or pure spectacle in the way of action sequences so that viewers can get invested in the moment. Novels tend to focus on passages that trigger your imagination so that the worlds you briefly inhabit can feel just a bit more personal. There are pros and cons to each medium, and figuring out why something worked in one should be the first step before attempting to change things. I also want to make it clear that my love for the original game series is not why I will be bringing up a ton of complaints. It would be easy to rail against Like a Dragon Yakuza because it doesn't follow the first game's plot beat for beat. A bunch of changes made feel totally out of left field, but altering aspects of that game's story and even mixing in elements from its official remake are not bad ways to approach an adaptation. If we had gotten an exact replica of the game, only as a mini-series, there wouldn't be much point in engaging with it. With that said, Like a Dragon Yakuza makes a very curious decision for its characters right from the start.
Kamurocho だぞ。今度こそ参りたいな。いいじゃ。おっさんのバイバイだろ。
Even back for its original release in 2005 on the PS2, Yakuza the game began in 1995 with an already established Kazuma Kiryu taking the fall for the murder of the Dojima clan patriarch that his blood brother, Akira Nishikiyama, committed. It was a stark way to open a game with the decision made because Sega, at the time, wanted to create a firmly adult-oriented story unlike other games on the market. In Like a Dragon Yakuza, we begin in 1995, but Kiryu and his friends are not part of any Yakuza families. On its own, that doesn't sound like such an awful decision, but trying to keep the same time frame as the game then starts to create the sensation that things are progressing far too quickly in the show. In the game, Kiryu serves 10 years for his crime and is reintroduced to society in 2005. Things have changed dramatically for him, and he doesn't even get to spend a single day as a free man before his old life comes racing towards him. In the show, we see Kiryu being released from prison in 2005, but it's not clear until much later why he was even in jail. The series tells things through a mixture of flashbacks and present-day footage, which muddies the plot and creates a start-stop phenomenon. Just as you get invested in one plot beat, the show shifts back or forward and the process restarts. Kicking off without an explanation doesn't really create the type of mystery the showrunners likely thought they were developing. It mostly paints Kiryu as an impetuous individual that makes snap decisions rather than a man that would sacrifice himself for his friends. More than that, it feels accelerated simply to get to the climax faster. Another curious change comes from the friend group that Kiryu keeps. As with the games, Kiryu is friends with Nishiki and considers him a brother. He is also very close to Yumi Sawamura, one of his cohorts in his merry little gang that happens to pal around with Miho Nishikiyama, a new addition for the show that takes the place of Nishiki's sister from Yakuza Kiwami. The group is seen performing petty crimes and stealing cash right as things begin, again painting the characters as dim-witted and without much care. The group winds up stealing 10 billion yen from the Tojo Clan on accident, and as a way to save his friends from harm, Kiryu pleads with the clan's patriarch, Sohei Dojima, to join the family. Nishiki doesn't want to be left out, and he attempts the same gesture, though Dojima is only interested in Kiryu. Dojima eventually relents, and after having Nishiki inducted, the two brothers proceed to get into hijinks as they navigate their new lives in organized crime. This is eventually interrupted when Miho falls ill with renal failure, prompting Kiryu to get into underground fighting and Nishiki to start making deals behind the gang's back. All of that sounds pretty decent written out, but the issue should be clear to anyone that has played the original games. For one, the series has a very fabricated sense of drama. While most stories are clearly fictitious, and certain moments act solely as a way to elicit emotions from an audience, good stories try to make their progression feel natural. You wouldn't care about a story where characters with gambling dent finally learn a way to defeat the system only for a random alien invasion to upend the entire ordeal. That type of writing feels contrived solely to get to a certain point, without considering how it destroys the logic of its universe. Like a Dragon Yakuza fails mostly because its characters aren't convincing in the slightest. As I said before, Kiryu mostly comes off as impetuous, and while his video game counterpart is often short-sighted and a little dense, this series takes that idea and turns Kiryu into an idiot. The gist of the plot rests on some serial killer called the Demon, and Kiryu winds up needing to figure out who that is. While it is actually pretty close to a beat from the Judgment series, a spin-off of the main Yakuza / Like a Dragon games, here Kiryu is completely ill-equipped to handle the threat. There is no real counterpart for the game's detective friend, Makoto Date, despite him being in a couple of scenes here. So Kiryu is just winging it for several episodes until the solution falls into his lap, as if the writers totally forgot they concocted some new ordeal for Kiryu to overcome. Yumi, as well, is a bizarre change from her game analog. While I appreciate that she has more agency in this TV show, she comes off as self-serving here. The characters love to point out to Kiryu how 10 years have passed and that he's stuck in the past, but no one seems to have evolved much as a person following Kiryu's jail stint, which is potentially a bit of intentional irony. Yumi is merely running a hostess club and bad-mouthing her sister, Aiko, another new addition here. She has fallen out with Nishiki, and because of her laser-focused dedication to her job, she hasn't even spent time with her sister's child, Haruka. She's very mean here, though at least when push comes to shove, she doesn't wind up dying like in the games. She actually helps resolve the entire plot. The crux of this entire adventure, which is Nishiki's rash decision of killing Dojima, doesn't get revealed until the final episode, robbing the story of any sense of tension when he and Kiryu are talking in various scenes. The bigger issue is that he's now a crazed killer, though. Nishiki in the games had become far more violent than Kiryu remembered him, but he wasn't a man that would cross a certain line unless he needed to. His actions felt like he was playing 4D chess, calculating how his words could manipulate people into doing his bidding, while also working to progress himself to the top of the food chain. Kiryu was a stark reminder of the life that he had, and something that he wanted to stamp out until the very end. In the show, we do get most of that attitude conveyed through the story, but the revelation in the final episode that he is the demon undoes any goodwill he might have had. It's changes like this that are the bigger problem than any plot differences. The stories in the Yakuza games can be entertaining, and they're often told through very impressive cutscenes, but their heightened melodrama comes from the cinema inspirations. Kiryu is such an earnest individual because Japanese Yakuza films typically never played tricks. They had tropes and cliches that were mixed and matched to excite and sadden audiences in equal measure. As such, the games have plots that will include a recreation of the World War II battleship Yamato because it's fantastical. With Like a Dragon Yakuza, we lose all of the melodrama and instead get characters that act like flanderized versions of their gaming counterparts. While Kiryu can often be very stoic in the games, he opens up to his friends and will even have heart-to-heart conversations with boss characters before battling them. In the show, he's just stoic, and the only emotion he gives is in the final few scenes. Goro Majima, a frenemy in the games who can have a bit of a wild streak, is just a lunatic in the show who enjoys hitting people. Shintaro Kazama, Kiryu's adopted father, is merely a mouthpiece for wisdom that winds up doing nothing else. Worse than all of this, however, is the lack of focus on the city of Kamurocho. Based on the real-life red light district of Tokyo called Kabukicho, Kamurocho is the main setting for the majority of installments in the Yakuza/Like a Dragon series and its spin-offs, save for the historical ones. As has often been written about the series, Kiryu's story cannot happen without Kamurocho, but Kamurocho can happen without Kiryu. It's a very dense and seedy bit of cityscape that plays host to so many interesting details that you could completely ignore the plots of the game and get lost for hours just exploring. In Like a Dragon Yakuza, we get one throwaway line about Kamurocho in the 3rd episode, and nothing else.
カムロ町の至る場所に設置されている監視カメラをジャックしてるの。最低でしょ。
For all intents and purposes, this story could have taken place anywhere in Japan. For that matter, it's not even specifically a Japanese story, almost appealing to Westerners more because it features some set dressing rather than going all in on cultural specifics. Still, with no highlight of how Kamurocho impacts the lives of its inhabitants, or even a look at the people who are walking the streets, this TV show feels utterly hollow next to the game series. Now, I would not have expected filler episodes where Kiryu goes bowling or sings karaoke, but a gigantic part of Yakuza/Like a Dragon's appeal rests within its side quests. You have Kiryu's exciting adventure to dig into, but when you stop to smell the metaphorical roses, you find a world beaming with characters who are all willing to impart wisdom onto the player. Kiryu, in return, learns to view things from a new light and gets to flex his emotional muscles in the process. It gives an extra layer of depth to Kiryu that cutting it out entirely would rob him of any complexity. This might sound if I'm approaching this from the perspective of the showrunners didn't replicate the games completely, but imagine being able to see Purgatory in real life. How about exploring the homeless encampments that littered West Park? What about the various Club Sega stores that called back to Sega's rich arcade legacy? Those details matter in Yakuza/Like a Dragon, even if they don't contribute explicitly to the narrative. There is no sense of presence in Like a Dragon Yakuza, and as such, the show feels meaningless. Sega very clearly planned the release of this show to coincide with an incredibly belated switchboard of Yakuza Kiwami, which then hasn't been retitled to reflect the series' rebranding in the West, but you would almost think this was something written, shot, and edited within 2024 with how slapdash it comes off. Nothing here seems like a change made to hit better in a purely visual medium, especially since the games are already rock solid at capturing the essence of Japanese crime dramas. Even if the writing can be lacking, you could view each game as a film in its own right. More to that point, where are the references to various Japanese films? While I never had that frame of reference going into the Yakuza/Like a Dragon games over a decade ago, my understanding of Japanese movies and V cinema has grown tremendously in the last few years. Encountering films such as The Hitman Blood Smells Like Rose, Yakuza-Dan, Bad City, and The Valiant Red Peony has made me realize just how much effort Ryuga Gotoku Studios has gone to recreate the vibes that these films have. Hell, Yakuza 0 even features famous V cinema actors Hitoshi Ozawa, Riki Takeuchi, and Hideo Nakano in prominent roles as a callback to their work in movies. Like a Dragon Yakuza has none of that. Maybe there is some obscure reference or homage I am missing, but this series is shot like any other streaming drama. It has basic shot-reverse shot dialogue, very weird superimposed shots of buildings, and bad-looking CGI for the Millennium Tower, a structure from the game that resembles various skyscrapers across the world and stands as an icon of hubris. Weirdly, Japan recently built a tower called the Tokyo Kabukicho Tower that resembles Millennium Tower, and that wasn't utilized as a stand-in for the show, which, time frame-wise, wouldn't have been there, but still. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass with a lot of this, but I don't know how else to interpret Like a Dragon Yakuza. It's not as blatantly awful as something like the Borderlands movie, or even adaptations of old, but it repeats a lot of the same mistakes that failed game adaptations have made. This is actually pretty similar to the 2021 reboot of Mortal Kombat, which managed to finally get that R rating, but then dumbed down the plot considerably and shoved in audience surrogates that weren't needed. The story in Yakuza/Like a Dragon isn't complex and doesn't necessitate such changes to become accessible for film. I don't even want to mention the fight scenes, which feel like a repeat of Snake Eyes from 2021. There are some behind-the-scenes clips about actors Ryoma Takeuchi and Kento Kaku training to do some cool stuff, but the editing utterly fails them. Nothing here is interesting in the slightest, and it captures none of the stylish flair that the games have. It's not even richly choreographed but cheaply shot like V-Cinema films. It's just plain shoddily edited. Far be it from me to tell you not to watch the series, however. I do think it was a wise choice to deviate so wildly from the original games, as it allows this show the chance to carve out its own identity. My issues lie with the fact that nothing here feels like the games it is drawing inspiration from. A good adaptation will mimic what it's adapting to complement where everything started. Like a Dragon Yakuza is less an adaptation and more something completely original borrowing a title. While admirable, you also need to make that original thing worth a damn, and this show simply doesn't do that.